It started with a whisper, and for months, that whisper stayed buried beneath hospital walls, under white coats and closed-door meetings. Her name was Imani Caldwell, and she'd been a nurse for over a decade. Dedicated, professional, quiet, but not weak. The day that changed everything began just like any other. Fluorescent lights, hallway chatter, charts in hand, until a patient came in, a young black man named Andre who'd been brought in by police. Non-compliant, resisting, they said. But Imani saw the bruises before they even finished the sentence. As the officers stood nearby, joking, she tried to speak up to her attending, but he gave her a look. The kind that says, "Don't make this complicated." She documented everything, the bruises, the inconsistencies, the panicked look in Andre's eyes. But later, when she returned to update the chart, the file had been modified. The next day, she was called into a meeting with hospital administration. "We appreciate your dedication, but you're not a detective. We need to be mindful of how this reflects on our partnerships. There will be no official report." They told her to let it go. Imani went home that night and stared at her ceiling. For hours, she thought about Andre, about his swollen face, about her own son. And then she remembered something. A cheap little voice recorder she used during nursing school, still in her drawer. The next shift, she carried it in her pocket, and what she caught was damning. Doctors laughing about covering their bases. A supervisor saying, "We don't need more noise from the activist types." It wasn't just about Andre. It was a pattern. She compiled everything. Dates, audio, notes. And then she called a lawyer. Not just any, but one known for taking on impossible civil rights cases. Weeks later, the story hit the local news. Then regional. Then national. The hospital scrambled. The police department issued a statement. But nothing could stop what was coming. Imani stood in front of microphones, her voice steady. "I was told to be silent. But silence protects no one except those doing harm." Andre stood beside her, healing but still shaken. He whispered, "Thank you for not letting them erase me. Now a new law bears her name, protecting medical whistleblowers." In the hospital, a full investigation, leadership turnover, and more eyes than ever. Some heroes wear scrubs. Some carry courage in their pockets. And if you're with us in fighting injustice, check out the link in the description for our official Black Unbroken merch. Every shirt supports future stories and real change. Because silence is no longer an option. Even after the cameras left and headlines faded, Imani's world didn't return to normal. She was getting threats, anonymous texts, slashed tires, a dead bird left on her porch. Her lawyer advised caution, even offered relocation, but Imani refused to disappear. "I didn't speak out to hide," she said. "I spoke out so others could be seen." Behind the scenes, the hospital was lawyering up. Their PR team worked overtime, issuing statements about commitment to transparency, while quietly firing junior staff who had backed Imani. But they hadn't counted on one thing. The tapes were just the beginning. After the story went public, other employees started reaching out. Nurses, janitors, even a physician's assistant who had left months earlier. Each had stories. One had proof. Imani met with them privately in a church basement downtown. She called it her shadow shift. Together, they formed a group, not just to speak, but to act. They partnered with a nonprofit legal team to file a class action complaint against the hospital, not just for Andre, but for dozens of patients whose records had been quietly altered over the years. Then came the subpoena, text messages, internal memos, and eventually, a leaked email from the chief of staff. Subject line contained the Caldwell situation. One sentence stood out: "Make an example of her if needed." The court called it retaliation. The media called it a bombshell, And the jury? They called it guilty. The verdict didn't just bring justice, it brought change. 3 high-ranking officials were removed. A federal oversight committee was installed, and Imani, she was offered a national role overseeing patient ethics. She accepted, but only if the first hospital she audited was her own. Now, years later, she visits nursing schools, tells students, truth matters more than silence. And every time someone asks where they can get her story on a shirt, she smiles and points them to the black, Unbroken store, because this movement, our movement, is just getting started. Visit the link in the description to wear the message and support more stories like Imani's. Courage isn't quiet anymore. The ripples of Imani's case weren't done spreading. 6 months after the verdict, a young med student named Tisha Everett came forward. She'd been a resident at a sister facility across the state. She said what Imani exposed wasn't just isolated, it was systemic. Tisha had screenshots, notes, even a photo of a whiteboard where a surgeon had written, "Minimize noise, prioritize partners." The partners, as it turned out, were local police contracts, just like in Imani's hospital. Imani flew out to meet her, and what Tisha showed her shook her. Patients misdiagnosed to avoid liability. Entire injury reports deleted. But one case stood out. A 12-year-old girl, Michaela, brought in after being restrained by school security. Her wrist had been fractured. Her voice? Dismissed. Imani couldn't unsee it. This wasn't just about one hospital, or even one city. It was a culture. So she partnered with civil rights attorneys to form a new coalition, the Quiet No More Initiative. Whistleblower nurses, doctors, medical students, all protected, all organized. When they filed a joint federal case, headlines exploded again. And this time, government officials had to respond. Congress opened an inquiry. A former health inspector came forward. Even a senator asked to meet with Imani personally, but behind closed doors, pushback mounted. Old systems don't die quietly. Emails leaked suggesting powerful donors were trying to discredit Imani. A right-wing host called her a professional victim, but she kept going. She released a public letter. "I'm not a victim. I'm a witness. And I will not stop until every buried truth is unearthed." When Michaela's mom heard it, she wept and asked if she could speak to so the next press conference. It wasn't just Imani on stage. It was nurses. It was patients. It was mothers. One microphone, hundreds of voices, and in the crowd people wearing black Unbroken merch, shirts that said, "Truth is loud. Protect whistleblowers." I stand with Imani. This wasn't the end. This was a beginning. Be part of it. Visit our merch store through the link in the description and support this growing movement. Because justice doesn't knock. It kicks the door open.